This evening I'm going to speak about the path factor of right effort. The quality of effort, Wayamo, and the path factor of right effort, Sama Wayamo, and also in the form of the closely related quality of energy, Wirya, shows up in several places in various lists of Bodhipakadhammas. It's a very important and crucial factor. The Buddha emphasized it quite a bit. He said that the path is for the energetic and not for the idle. It is important to understand exactly what is meant by right effort and what is not. It's something that's, I think, in many cases misunderstood. First of all, in terms of the path factor, one of the factors of the Eightfold Path, it's defined as being the four right efforts, which are the effort to rouse up wholesome states of mind, wholesome dhammas that have not yet arisen, the effort to encourage the flourishing and growth of such wholesome states as are present, the effort to prevent unwholesome states from arising, and the effort to diminish and finally eradicate those unwholesome states which have already arisen. So, as defined in this summary that occurs in the formula of the Eightfold Noble Path, right effort is defined in terms of the effort to govern the mind. And this is something that's not always easy to do. The mind can be an unruly beast. Before beginning practice, people generally have very little control over their own mind states. And it's a big part of the discipline of the practice is learning to, first of all, recognize, and second, to control or govern the contents of the mind, the states of mind which are arising. Those states that are kusala, skillful, literally skillful, or wholesome or profitable, the kusala states are those which are based on wisdom, on non-clinging and generosity, and so on. The akusala or unskillful states are those based on ignorance, confusion, greed, anger, ill will, and so forth. So it takes the quality of mindfulness, sati, to recognize which states are present in the mind, and then to further understand the causal factors, and to work with those states to try and encourage the wholesome states. So when states of mind such as clarity, brightness, joy arise, we should encourage them and try and understand what causes them to arise and try and make them flourish and grow. When states of ill will, negativity, greed, desire, longing, obsession, arise in the mind, then we should be, first of all, recognizing them and knowing them as undesirable states not welcome here, and try and understand what's causing them, what's the causal factor, what's the nutriment, how are they being fed, and cut them off, diminish them. If no effort is put in, it often becomes a continual self-feeding cycle in the mind with defilements. We justify the defilement, we bring up thought formations to reinforce it, and just keep spiraling worse and worse. If you feel anger or ill will towards someone, maybe someone who's wronged you in the past or someone who's annoying you presently, it's very easy to fall into a cycle of blame and telling a story in your mind and reinforcing that negative state. But the right effort is to diminish that state and to make the effort of purifying the mind so we can counter negative states with positive states. Ill will is countered by compassion or loving kindness. Sensual desire is countered by contemplating the nature of the body, the foulness of the body, the 32 parts of the body, or corpse meditation, and so forth. So this is one very central aspect of right effort, the right effort to govern the mind. One of the qualities of an arahant, a perfected being, is that they are masters of the pathways of their mind. They think only that which they wish to think, and they do not think that which they do not wish to think. So from that statement, we can, first of all, get a sense of the direction we should be moving in, but also we should be careful to not get discouraged at our own lack of perfection, because it's only when you're an arahant that you'll have complete mastery of the mind. You should be working to increase that, moving towards that. The mind is like a wild beast that is tamed. The Buddha used this analogy like taming an elephant. How they train an elephant for the Royal Army service. They get a wild elephant and tie it to a post. And at first it bellows and rages and roars and stomps around and runs hither and thither to the end of the rope. And then gradually the elephant begins just pacing in a circle around the post at the end of the chain. And finally it lays down beside the post, and then they know that it's been tamed, and they can begin training it for the use in the army. And they can remove the chain. And the analogy is the elephant is the mind, the post is the meditation object, and the chain is mindfulness. So as long as you keep the mind chained to the post, at first it'll rage and roar, but as long as you don't let the chain be broken, gradually the mind will settle down. Right energy, virya, comes up in the list of the 5 faculties. The 5 spiritual faculties or powers, the indriya. And there it has a very direct application to the development of meditation and bhavana. The 5 faculties have 2 pairs around the center. The center position is sati, mindfulness, which is required at all times. And it's said to be, the analogy given in the Visuddhimagga is that it's like salt, which improves the flavor of all dishes. You can maybe question the culinary advice of Buddhaghosa, but you see the point he's getting at. And the remaining factors form 2 complementary pairs balancing each other, which we could call an inner pair and an outer pair. The outer pair are saddha, faith, and panya, wisdom. And they set the background of the mind, and it's required that they be balanced. Saddha without panya, faith without wisdom, is superstition or dogmatism. But wisdom, panya, which has a particular meaning in this context as being like application of wisdom, discriminating wisdom. If that is not informed by faith, then it leads to cunning, which is said to be as hard to cure as a disease caused by medicine. It's like being too smart for your own good, overthinking, and it tends to develop a very skeptical, cynical kind of a mindset. It's not informed by the quality of faith. And if faith is present without any wisdom, it's just superstition. And the faith can be applied erroneously to any object. So these set the overall tone of the mind, but the inner pair are the ones that particularly apply and directly, immediately in the practice, and that's virya, energy, and the complementary opposite to it is samadhi. And a lot of the skill in meditating well is balancing these two factors. It's first of all with sati, knowing which factors are present, which are strong, and which are weak, and then taking the appropriate action. You want to bring them up in tandem. A good modern metaphor is like changing a tire. You torque down the bolts evenly. You do one here, one there, then over here, then over there. You don't torque one down all the way. You're going to bend the rim, and it's not going to work. So you bring the factors up together. And if one gets ahead of the other, then you concentrate on the weak one. So virya is effort, is application of effort in the meditation. And samadhi is stability, peacefulness, the focus in the meditation. And you can see in your own practice that when you're not right on, when the practice is falling off, it'll be generally in one way or another, in one direction or another. Either you'll fall into restlessness and agitation, a difficulty of sitting still physically, a difficulty of keeping the mind quiet, the thoughts are running all over the place. And this is an excess of energy and not enough samadhi. Or the other extreme, you fall into dullness, drowsiness, sleepiness, a lack of enthusiasm, you feel bored, listless. This is samadhi without any energy behind it. Sometimes called miccha samadhi, or wrong or false samadhi. The Thais talk about, Thai Ajahns talk about bhavanga, which is a term taken from Abhidhamma, but it's used in a little different sense in the Thai forest teaching to mean a state of mind where there's some samadhi, but there's not any energy. And it becomes like self-hypnotic. You fall into a dozy kind of a trance. This is a lack of energy. The opposite is the overly energetic state with no samadhi, no focus, and then instead of being sleepy, the mind is twitchy, the body is unsettled, unable to sit still, unable to restrain the limbs, and unable to restrain the mind. So if the two are developed in tandem, if they're balanced, then the meditation goes very well. If it's falling off in the direction of dullness, then you need to raise the energy. And this can be a problem for meditators sometimes, getting stuck in kind of dull, sleepy states. At that time, you shouldn't be concerned about the quality of your samadhi. Don't try to over-concentrate. That'll only make it worse. At that point, you need to energize. So you can do a number of things like meditating with eyes open. is a very simple thing that can help. It brings in more light. Light is always good for this, and generally we prefer to meditate with eyes closed in our tradition because there's less distraction. But at this point, if you're trying to raise energy, you're not too worried about being a little distracted. You're trying to get the energy up. So meditate with eyes open. Do more walking meditation. Walk more briskly. You can play with the walking meditation quite a bit to balance mental states. If you're very dull and sleepy, one exercise is to walk backwards. It kind of forces you to wake up a bit. Another very potent one is in the wintertime is to do a little walking meditation outdoors in the snow barefoot. That wakes you up pretty quick. Yeah. There's a sutta where the Buddha he's giving advice to Moggallana, who became the disciple most pronounced in psychic powers. And early in his meditation, shortly after he became a monk, he suffered a lot from drowsiness. He was always falling asleep. And the Buddha gave him some various tips and advice for waking up. And one of them is, besides what I've already mentioned, is like splashing the face with cold water, going outside at night and looking at the stars to expand the mind, brighten and broaden the mind. And one is contemplation of the perception of light. So to bring up a nimitta or an imaginary vision of bright light, like try to fill the mind with light. That's a very powerful way of waking up. That same sutta also mentions one small kind of physical trick that's like sort of like a acupuncture point, is tugging on the earlobes. And there's a couple of, not from the sutta but from other traditions, there's a couple of other useful ones like that. One from the Tibetan tradition is to curl the tongue inside the mouth so the tip of the tongue is resting as far back on the palate as you can. And that stimulates an energetic circuit in the body-mind system. And that's actually quite potent. Another one is to sit with your hands in the mudra on your lap, with the right hand on the left and the thumbs lightly touching. That's a good one because if you start to get a least bit sleepy, your thumbs come apart. They fall away from each other. So it's a kind of a self-check. Yeah. Another one, but only really you should do this if you're meditating alone because it could be disturbing to other people in the group, is to put some light object on top of your head, like a empty matchbox. And then if you nod, it'll fall, and you'll know right away. Yeah. When I was in Thailand, there was one Ajahn, one of the monasteries, that I heard a story about him, that he got so annoyed with his monks and novices always nodding off in the morning meditation that he made them all sit with something on their heads like that, and if it fell off your head once, then all you got at the meal was just sticky rice, nothing else. If it fell off twice, you got nothing at all. Now this is dealing with a lack of energy. On the other hand, the other extreme is too much energy. Careful with the phrasing there. There's no such thing as too much concentration, too much samadhi, or too much energy if they're balanced. But if there's a lot of energy but there's no samadhi, then you fall into the opposite trouble. You're not going to fall asleep, but you're unable to sit still. You can notice it physically. You can feel a twitchiness in the body and the limbs. You're just unable to restrain the body. There might be small pains in the body caused by this, and And the mind is affected in that it's jumping around, running from place to place, and thoughts of the past, thoughts of the future, unable to be quiet. And what's needed here is to raise the level of samadhi, of stability. Samadhi, actually, I'm being careful not to use the common English translation, which is concentration, because I think that's very misleading. Let me return to that. But samadhi is defined in the Abhidhamma as stability, or a non-wavering stillness. So it's the mind that's still. It's not concentrated to a point. It's a wide open, but it's not moving. It's filled with a single object. More samadhi means you need more stillness, more stability. And this is a very important point if you come up against restlessness in the meditation, is to remember that what you need is to counter it with stillness. So first of all, physically, you should make a very strong effort to be still, to not move, to not change postures, to not keep shifting and fussing, but to stay still. And to restrain the mind, try to hold it on the object. This can be difficult to do because the mind at that time will, when the restlessness is a defilement, it will come up with 101 things you should be doing right now. It doesn't want to sit still. It wants to get up and go for a walk. It wants to chop some wood. It wants to read a book. It wants to have a cup of tea. And you have to say, no, you're going to sit here and look at the breath. And that's that. You have to be quite disciplined with yourself at that time. That's the only way to get through restlessness, is to restrain it. If you give into it, it's like appeasing it. The mind will come up with the idea, well, I'm not having a good run of this meditation. I'll do better after I go for a walk, or after I do some Tai Chi, or whatever. That's the whisperings of Mara. You should first of all have the wisdom and the sati to see what the problem is. The problem is restlessness. So I need to restrain it. Mostly what I've been talking about here is pretty coarse level adjustments, like the big knob on the radio, and then there's the little knob underneath for fine tuning. When your meditation is going well, you can just fine tune the mental stream, just moving it to a little bit more samadhi or a little bit more energy, just trying to keep that balanced middle point. Subtle adjustments. In the more general sense about right effort as applied to the practice, it's all about finding that sweet spot, the balance point. There's the story of Sona, the musician that lived at the time of the Buddha, who was having difficulties with his meditation, and the Buddha said, when you were playing your lute, don't you have to tune strings? He says, yes. And he says, what happens if you tune them too tight? Then they break. What happens if you tune them too loose? Then you don't get the right sound. They just flop about. And he says, this is the same with the mind. You have to tune the mind and find that right point of practice. So it's not too tight, not too loose. I think this is very crucial to understand if you want to have success in the meditation, is to find the right application of effort. If there's not enough effort, the mind will just be flaccid and floppy and you won't get anywhere. But if there's too much intensity of effort, then pretty soon the mind frays and you gets exhausted and you wander off, and it's not conducive either. So one thing I see as a common mistake that people make in meditation is this putting too much forcefulness onto the mind, to try and force it onto the object. And I've come to the conclusion that a lot of the problem stems from our use of language in talking about meditation. And I've been trying in the last several years to correct that and be careful with that. A lot of the common English translations are, I think, very unfortunate. Beginning with this term of samadhi being translated as concentration. Concentrate means to make small, to bring to a tight focus. So people hear that, concentrate the mind on the breath, and they try and narrow the mind onto the breath. And that's never successful in the long run. And it's not the meaning of samadhi. The mind in samadhi is not a tight little thing. It's vast, it's expansive, but it's still. Now, this is the key factor: stability or stillness. It takes a single object. Samadhi is the mind holding a single object, but it doesn't do that by narrowing itself onto the object. It does that by not shifting, by remaining still. And in that way, the mind is able to be vast and expansive. The mind in jhana is the equivalent of a Brahma god, and their mind encompasses tens of thousands of world systems. So it's not a narrow focus. It's a stability. So the best way to think of it is filling the mind with the breath, or with whatever the object might be. So the mind is still. It's not moving. It's not attacking the breath. It's letting the breath fill the space of the mind. One kind of caveat to that is to remember in the formula of the first jhana, there's 5 factors, and 2 of the factors are vitakka and vichara. And this is quite directly applicable to right effort. Vitakka is the striking of the object with the mind, and vichara is holding the mind, holding the object with the mind. So there's a series of analogies in the Visuddhimagga, and the one that I think is most evocative is striking a gong with a striker. If you strike a gong, you get a crisp, clear tone, and then afterwards there's a reverberation that lasts for several seconds. And that striking is like vitakka, and the reverberation is vichara. So you should be trying to emphasize vichara, holding the object steady. But if the mind is gone completely off the object, is wandering, you need to judicious application of vitakka, and just bring the mind sharply to the object momentarily, and then just steadily allow it to be. But don't keep striking it again and again. That agitates the mind. It's quite clear in the Abhidhamma that vichara is a higher or more refined factor than vitakka, because the Abhidhamma system talks about 5 jhanas, and by breaking the first one into 2, there's the first jhana in the Abhidhamma system is the same as the first jhana in the Sutta system. It mentions vitakka and vichara. Second jhana is vichara only in the Abhidhamma system. Because vitakka is gone, there's only vichara. So there's a movement of the mind as it deepens in samadhi. There's less and less vitakka, there's more vichara, which means there's more stillness, there's more just steady holding of the mind. Now, when you get this sense of the right balance of energy, of effort, then the meditation basically seems to do itself. When the energy is perfect, it doesn't feel like you're making any effort. And I've heard this state called different things. One is undistracted non-meditation. Another one is that I particularly like is diligent effortlessness. Diligent effortlessness. You find that state when you're absolutely diligent. You're not missing a thing, but it doesn't feel like you're trying. It's just doing itself. Now that's the perfect meditation. The perfect meditation, we could also say, is doing nothing. If you can absolutely do nothing, then the meditation is perfect. But because that's such a difficult thing to do, we give you minimal sort of exercises, like watch the breath. The absolutely perfect meditation is just being there. Of course, if the mind's running off into thoughts and fantasies, then you're doing something. You're not doing nothing. So you can see how difficult it is to do nothing. The story about the Tibetan sage Milarepa, on his wandering, he was chastised by some village people. They were busy building a shed or something, and he was standing on a little hillock watching them, and then he thought, I think I'll do some lying down meditation. And he lay down on his back on this hillock, and the villagers started to curse him and said, look at these yogi beggars. In a half an hour, he'll be down here begging for food. Why don't you come down here and pick up a board, give us a hand? He said, oh, I'd love to. I'd really like to help, but I'm far, far too busy trying to do nothing. It's taking everything I've got. And final point I'd like to make about right effort is an aspect of right effort that is far more fruitful and useful than intensity of effort is persistence or steadiness of effort. Persistent continuity of effort. It's like if you feel inspired and enthusiastic, meditate. If you don't feel enthusiastic and inspired, meditate. And this is something that's really important, that you can establish a habit in the mind. I think this is something that applies very much to a daily practice. People sometimes ask about advice about what kind of practice they should do, how long they should do, and so on. The single most important factor is that it's steady, that it's done regularly, without fail. That you set up a habit. And it's particularly important to take it up when you really have resistance, because that means the mind's close to working on something that the ego doesn't want to look at. So, it's most important to just keep going anyway. There's this factor of the mind of habituated karma that if we fall into patterns, everybody can see this in their own existence. You can see how the mind falls into ruts and patterns, and it's easy to just continue the same routine all the time, and it takes an effort to make a change, right? And that's not entirely a bad thing, because you can set up profitable habits. You can make it so it's a habit every day that you're going to do this amount of meditation at this particular time, and set it up as a habit so that it becomes absolutely routine in the mind, and then there's no difficulty with it anymore. One of the principles that applies to many, many aspects of the practice, from ethics and morality to meditation. Everything is, to put it in colloquial English, it's fake it till you make it. You know? Even if you don't think your meditation is going well, and you think, oh, I'm just wasting my time, you're gaining something just by establishing a habit of just, if you said, I'm going to sit for an hour, and then you find after half an hour you're finding yourself really restless or uncomfortable or unhappy, then let's sit for an hour anyway. You know, even, and you are gaining something. You're strengthening, first of all, the quality of adhitthana, determination, which is one of the paramis. Every time you give up and just take the easy way out, you're weakening the adhitthana parami, and you're giving yourself an easier goal the next time to give up. But every time you persevere and carry it through, then you've got an accomplishment, and you've strengthened that parami, and you've strengthened your practice. So that's another aspect of right effort as well.